Hello, Professor. This is my presentation on Maxim 2. There are many ways. There are many ways to make ethical change, probably as many ways as there are different individuals and circumstances. Why is this maxim important at all for living an ethical life? Well, unapplied ethical knowledge is essentially useless. It gets you nowhere. Action is required to actually apply and put into practice these things that you now know. To help you act ethically, you must act ethically. Fairly simple. This is, I believe, why people hate philosophy, is because they think that thinking about thinking is useless. However, they also never take the step to then take action to actually put the thinking about thinking into practice. However, action is very scary, as we see with this young gentleman here, taking that first jump, that plunge into the pool of ethical behavior or ethical action is frankly terrifying. So Weston gives us here a solution within this maxim, reminding us that there are many ways to jump into the pool, per se, of ethical living. You can not only go off the high dive, you can also go off perhaps the lower dive. Frankly, you can maybe even just go down the stairs into a pool like a normal person. This can make that whole experience a lot easier and just relieve that pressure of, I must perform an action in this certain manner. Weston gives us specifically 4 manners in which we can apply our ethical knowledge. We can use our words. We can have reasoned and informed discussions surrounding ethical questions with others. We can do deeds. We can take actions, because our individual actions can have larger reverberations that will result in widespread ethical change, even outside of just the first action that you take. We can show up. Many people coming together can be a powerful force for ethical change, so be a part of it. And we can interact with our community. There are people already working to make an ethical change around us. We don't necessarily need to just go out and make a bold deed, or just go out and, if we're shy about using our words, we can instead join a group that already has articulated those words, already made those values, and simply participate. Now, how do we tie this back into our course material? I'm going to be doing this for each of the values that have been discussed, starting here with using your words. First, you need to spell out the deeper values at stake. You need to make the connections. This is what Weston says. I would articulate this in more of a matter of making sure that you are articulating your ethical position as well as that of others. And with an extremely subtle reference here, I've decided to pull in the work of Immanuel Kant to help argue this via the categorical imperative. If everyone around you deserves to be treated as an end and not necessarily merely as a means, then they also deserve the same information that you have. Therefore, it is your obligation to spell out the values at stake for them if they do not understand them. Of course, doing so in a manner that still continues to treat them as an end and not a means. But you now have this obligation almost to help inform them and bring them up to your level so that they're not a means, they're an end, they're being respected. Now, Weston actually has the example within the book of his class. His class takes a very common problem, that of how do we, make people care for the environment at all, environmentalism. And this group of students pulls in a whole bunch of other values. They use their previous ethical knowledge. Specifically, they pull in this idea of individualism, which is a very widely held value within our society. And then they take that, but they frame it for the viewer as one of a multitude of values, not the one central value. Thus, educating, using their knowledge to treat the person that is being informed as an end and not a means, and allowing them to make this new platform, this new angle to coming towards acting ethically towards the world around us. Now, how does this apply to me personally? I've used words in my life to talk to my brother Trevor. Trevor sometimes struggles with how to interact with people around him in a helpful and productive manner. So I have implied the ethical knowledge that I've had to help him, just kind of giving him this basic idea of treating people equally as ends, not merely as means. However, I've been somewhat convicted. How do I apply this better to my life in the future? I think that it's just as simple as remembering in every interaction I'm having, I can use my ethical knowledge to help find middle grounds for arguments that may otherwise be deadlocked. For example, we could use Weston's creative provocation strategies, like an ideal solution. If 2 of my friends are at an impasse about an ethical decision and there's no forward progress that's being made, and they're both so firmly entrenched in their position, I can propose an ideal solution, something crazy, completely out of left field, that could potentially break this ethical deadlock and allow ethical progress to be made on this decision, as opposed to this just complete deadlock, as they can't rectify their positions. Moving on next to deeds. As Weston says here, in the right place and time, individual deeds may have powerful moral reverberations. An individual's actions can resonate louder throughout history and create wider change, as opposed to just the simple first action you're doing. I'm pretty familiar with this concept as a whole, as a military history major, and being familiar with history more generally, which is one of the prime examples, actually, that Weston pulls from within the textbook. He references the tank man in Tiananmen Square, whose simple action of standing in front of the tanks in this famous photo has this further reverberation around the world, telling about an individual standing up against the government, against power, against these giant steel machines that could crush him easily. It's a call for shared humanity. It's a call against power. That is something way out of proportion to a man holding groceries standing in front of a tank. Connecting this to other course material, I think back to our good old friends, the utilitarians. Just consider the idea. Do your deeds maximize your utility, in the sense that they increase happiness and decrease suffering proportionally? Now, this doesn't necessarily mean you have to be utilitarian in all of your decision making, but it does give you a good jumping off point, a reminder to consider that your deeds can sometimes have use in maximizing that utility. They can minimize suffering and increase happiness. And frankly, under most moral frameworks, that is a good idea to shoot for, on average. How do I apply this to my life? Well, historically, one of the deeds that I very much strive for is showing up for my practices on time. I am an athlete, I run track here. Some of my teammates don't always show up on time, and I can see how that impacts my coach and their mentality. So, by showing up on time to practice, by fulfilling this obligation, while it's not always convenient for me, it does maximize the happiness of my coach and decrease his suffering. Therefore, maximizing the utility and being an ethical action, an ethical deed. How can I maybe apply this to my life more? Well, I think the simple action of picking up trash, as our wonderful Breaking Bad themed anti-littering ad proposes. Keep the litter out of our territory. Keep the litter out of my space. This is something that both maximizes my own happiness as the world around me gets cleaner, and maximizes the happiness and decreases the suffering as others, as they don't have to look at trash. And the only cost is a small deed of picking up a wrapper that's on the floor and throwing it away. Now, showing up. This is a little bit confusing compared to showing up versus community action. The differentiation that I'm drawing here is that showing up is a wider and larger movement than just something that's localized. Showing up would be something like showing up for a protest. That's the example that Weston draws on in the text. And he ties through this thorough string that people make moral change together. Individuals, when they've come together to make this large collective outside of even their local community, outside of even their sphere, that's when large, widespread moral change can happen, which can be ethical if you're proposing an action that is a more ethical solution than one that is widely morally held in that society. I love my mom. Don't you? One of the things that we discuss within the course material is this idea of an expanding sphere of the relationships of ethics, ethical relationships. I love my mom. I owe some responsibility within that relationship, some ethical responsibility. This is within our textbook described as one of the oldest forms of ethical responsibility, in fact. So, I am obligated, via my love for my mother, to care for her. I also, by extension, as this sphere expands, as we discussed in our textbook, then bear this obligation to the society around me. So, since I love my mom, I should do things to propose change to increase the overall enjoyment that my mother has in our relationship. As such, I should also strive to help the community. And then I think that this quote from page 208, discussing specifically this idea of this community values, despite thinking that maybe just following the community norm would be valuing the community the most and maximizing your participation in that aspect, this is actually not true, as one kind of contribution to your community can be a loving resistance, as they say here, to make moral change, to help others act ethically. How does this show up in my own life? Well, I took an example of showing up would be to my friend Thomas's graduation. Thomas was graduating a year earlier than me, he's older, and I had basically no obligation to go to this graduation. However, my family and I decided to go out of our way and show up. And this was an ethical decision, as it turned out that our presence was very much welcome, and it increased our overall enjoyment in our relationship with them and their enjoyment in our relationship with them as well. How may I apply this perhaps more? I think perhaps showing up for my siblings' games. Sometimes I'm a little tired. I don't really want to go to my brother's basketball game or my sister's soccer game. However, by showing up, I can increase that relationship. And that's just one of the inner layers of that sphere of relationships that I owe obligation to. So surely I should fulfill that, which will then better enable me to perhaps show up for larger deeds in the future, to make more widespread societal change if it calls for my name. Now, regarding community action. Weston here, you can find change-making organizations and communities already in action right around you. It's pretty much as simple as you don't need to initiate necessarily any of these other things if that is the high dive for you. Perhaps take the stairs into the pool. Just find someone who's already in the action in the community around you and joined their change making. They've probably already articulated some sort of a mission statement that has ethical backing behind it. Just participate in their ethical decisions. I thought about this and I was like, this seems to be ringing very similar bells to the idea of virtue ethics. And one of the most important things about virtue ethics is practicing virtual ethics. Now, this led me to the only other logical conclusion. This is essentially rec soccer, but for ethics. This community action is super accessible. You can very easily enroll your kids in it, and frankly, most people have already done it at some point. However, it gives you valuable practice in, specifically for the kids in this case, learning how to move your body. Not always successfully, but it is overall a net gain for you in the long run. Similarly here, a community-making organization that already has been there and making change is a great opportunity to practice these virtues, to practice making ethical decision-making in a safe and easy and accessible environment before you perhaps move on to high school soccer or college soccer. Now, how have I done community action in the past? One of the biggest community actions I've ever done in my life is volunteering at the Commemorative Air Force Air Base, Arizona, nearby my house. As a military history major, I've been pretty familiar with the subject for a long time, so I decided to volunteer and give my time to helping inform others. Here's a picture of SJ, Sentimental Journey, which was our B-17G that is still flying and still operational, that is operated by that air wing. And I would often give people tours and explain the aircraft to them, sharing knowledge that I have with the community around me, which, going back even to Kant, is treating others as ends by informing them of the knowledge that I have. How could this apply to my life in the future? Just a simple reminder to continue to be useful in the community around me. If I don't want to jump off the high dive, but I still want to make ethical change, I can find local organizations that are already making a change, that already have these articulated values, and are already pushing for the same ethical change that I want to see in the world. And I can join them. I don't need to go out and use my words, do my deeds, or even necessarily show up in a widespread, extra-communal sense. Instead, I can just join an organization that already is doing those things. In conclusion, we can employ this maxim to escape the fear of action. We can make ethics applicable by simply adhering to Weston's second maxim. On a personal note, I think that during the course of this project, I've really kind of had to reflect on my own past experiences employing ethical decision-making and using all of the things described in this maxim. And it's reminded me that whenever I do end up employing these, and when I do end up living ethically, I often find a very positive net outcome for both myself and the world around me. So I've been convicted in this experience to just remind me to continue to act ethically around me. Even when it's not fun, even when it looks like it's jumping off of the high dive, I can at the very least look to go take the stairs.